Thanks for these clarifications about our ability to produce defossilized fuels, which there's a lot of work being undertaken, as you showed us, and you showed us things that I was not spontaneously expecting in your presentation. The action of some of these syn fuels on contrails, well, that's a good bonus. So there's a lot of work to do, but when you're talking about a TRL technology readiness level, whether we're close to industrial use or not, where are we? What number are we talking about? 6, 7? Are you talking for SAFs? About SAFs? Yeah, we're at 9. We can use them. There's just not the amounts. Yes, that's what I wanted you to say. They're mature, but we don't have the necessary amounts, and now we need to build pilots to show how we can have large-scale plans. Our listeners have been sending in questions for yourself and for Philippe, who's still here. We'll connect him in a minute. So I'm going to ask you both questions, and I think that I need to start a jingle first to kick off this Q&A. Right. First question, what is? Can you hear me? Why the industrial or agricultural-based methane why is that not promoted as much as hydrogen? Because such methane can be produced pretty much anywhere. That's a question for either of you. Who would like to answer? I'll let you answer, Philippe. All right. Well, methane appeared in my table, but I didn't give you many details about that. That's a possible route. It's not a drop-in because, well, because it's a gas that you'll need to store as a cryogenic liquid. The advantage over hydrogen is that the storage temperature is higher. That removes a lot of problems. But then methane, well, the difficulty is that it can be produced from biomass also, but then you need to compare it to the benefit of having a biofuel directly from biomass. That's sort of the question. What's more interesting in terms of overall efficiency and availability is whether you can already directly produce a biofuel, or do you need to go through the intermediate step of methane? Methane is also mentioned in decarbonization scenarios because the advantage is that methane, with its composition CH4, does not have the same CH relationship as a hydrocarbon, so intrinsically it emits less CO2 for the same amount of energy produced as a hydrocarbon like kerosene. So methane is natural gas. Natural gas contains a lot of methane, so that's something that could already be used, starting from fossil fuels for efficiency gains, and gradually we could go to fully renewable composition, either from biomass. In my table, you could also see that methane could be used as a PTL. You could have either power to liquid or power to gas. So it would be PTG here. There are different possible routes, but you need to look at the best compromise in terms of overall energy efficiency over the whole chain and impact on infrastructure. Also, with a slight detriment to methane, methane should be proscribed in terms of leaks because of the overall global warming power associated to methane. So it's not fully excluded, but yeah, it's not the route that we're looking at the most right now. Okay, thank you, Philippe. I've got a question for both of you. Can you really count on a voluntary approach by industry for them to reduce their emissions, whereas they're exempt from very stringent standards as opposed to automotive standards, for instance? Who'd like to take a stab? Maybe Patrick? Over to you, Patrick. Well, yes, it's always difficult for a researcher to answer slightly political questions. Well, we were talking about policy earlier. Well, yes, okay, I'll carry on then. What happened before the pandemic and and flight shaming came as a response. There's not just politics on the one hand and industry on the other hand. There's also the traveling public. If you're asking people on board a flight whether they'd be ready to pay more, 80% of people answer yes to these polls, but in reality you come back to maybe 1 or 2%. But there's at least some willingness there. And then you need to find the most adequate tool, and I think that this is the problem right now. The question is not whether we're going to introduce a tax. We need to find the right tool. I don't have any answer, but we're going to find it. I think we'll come back to it in the round table from CTOs later. And maybe if I can add something to that, Xavier.
Yeah, it is not exactly accurate to say that this applies to aviation only. You have, well, something about well, the ICAO has introduced a CO2 standard, which is not too burdensome, but might become so later. But there's another thing about aviation is that, well, of course, aviation is a very international industry. It's much easier to apply standards on a closed market such as the automotive industry because, well, the French automobiles are built in France and mostly used in France, so it's much easier there to apply standards than it is to apply standards in an international framework where, well, environmental concerns are not considered in the same way from one country to the next or from one region to the next, at least on the political front. All right, then. Well, thank you for this point. An easy one now. Are there any significant differences in PCIs from one south to the other? No, there are no significant differences is the answer. Well, there's one small point, and that actually we find that the specific energy is often higher, which means that you can gain 1 or 2 percentage points in MTOW, maximum takeoff weight. That's a good one. And then a more exotic question, with hydrogen, do you not find situations of exo-atmospheric losses which might, if you use lots of it, actually reduce the amount of water on Earth? Well, no one has mentioned that. I don't know if you mention when you emit gases in the troposphere, can they actually leave the atmosphere? I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that. What you can say about this is that at least research being done on the use of hydrogen in aviation, and so therefore the emission of water steam is an issue that is being studied very actively, and we'll probably know more about this. But what is being considered is more the effects on contrails than on this issue of actually water leaking out into space. But I mean, likewise for CO2. I mean, when you emit CO2 high up in the atmosphere, that might also leak out into space. I tend to think the answer is no, but well, for some time, I mean, 20 years ago, so a number of studies were conducted because people were wondering whether ascending hydrogen might not in a way, react with the ozone layer and eat it up. So, I mean, it was considered seriously. It turns out not to be the case, even though there are hydrogen leaks all over the place, in particular liquid hydrogen that boils off. Anyway, I think we're a bit... we have one extra minute. We don't have time for 4 questions, but if you can say one word. Well, I was delighted to have taken place in the discussion. We are happy to take other questions. Well, we'll meet again in 20 years' time. We'll see where we stand. Well, things are moving very slowly indeed. We will need to step on the gas, as it were, to get things going. In any case, as Patrick pointed out, if you start looking into SAFs, you can see that you can get started, hit the ground running, as it were. You don't need to build new planes, and there's a direct way of redressing the carbon balance. We'll take a 5-minute break. I would like to thank you both for attending, and we'll be back in 5 minutes with Axel.